Aloha, I'm Sean Reeks, Director of Business Development and Community Outreach for Islands Hospice. I'd like to take a moment to welcome everyone here today on our presentation over the topic Coping with Grief and Compassion Fatigue, a focus on healthcare workers and caregivers. We have folks tuning in all across Oahu and Maui. We have friends and family joining us from the mainland. I have healthcare worker family members who have tuned in from the mainland as well. So truly, thank you all for joining us today. If you've ever been on an airplane, well, you've certainly heard the safety briefing, right? And what we always flight attendants say is, in case of cabin pressure changes, the oxygen masks will fall down. And they always say, be sure to secure your own mask first before helping others. And this is, of course, because if you don't secure that mask first, if you don't take care of yourself first, you'll quickly be unable to help others. This same concept applies in healthcare. We've got to practice self-care so we're able to then provide the best possible care to others. We're all prone in healthcare to experiencing grief and experiencing compassion fatigue, especially if the work we do involves caring for patients at or near end of life. So I'd like now to introduce our featured speaker for this presentation, Sally Hanley. She is a certified grief counselor. She's a board-certified chaplain, and she's an ordained minister. And she functions as the Director of Social Services here at Islands Hospice, overseeing programs and services that help families and patients navigate end-of-life conversations and end-of-life planning. She's given presentations to small groups, and she's given presentations to thousands of people in stadiums. But today she's here with us. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Sally Handley.
Thank you, Sean. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad to have you here from the mainland and from the islands, and I hope you enjoyed our Hawaiian music. We send you a big aloha wherever you're joining us from. The things we're going to talk about today are very near and dear to my heart. Most of my work goes towards dealing with people with grief and healthcare workers with compassion fatigue. So I'm very encouraged that you're taking this time today to hopefully learn to identify some of the symptoms in yourself and in your coworkers. I appreciate your time, and we're going to jump right into it. I know many of you just have an hour to continue. So let's begin with compassion fatigue. This is defined as a set of symptoms arising from long-term or continuous caregiving of one or multiple persons. Now, many of the symptoms might be irritability, aches and pains, boredom and apathy, fatigue, sleep disruption, memory loss, depression, and I can see the eyes rolling already because some of you are probably saying, well, I have that. And we all have one or more of these from time to time. But what we want to look at today is, are you having multiple symptoms, and are you unable to deal with them so that they go away over a period of time? If they're lasting, if you're continuing to have sleepless nights, if you're continuing to be told by others that you're being very irritable or short-tempered, these are the things we want to look at and talk about today. So where does it come from? Well, often it comes from our family of origin. Our mom, our dad, our siblings. And that's not to say that maybe we were raised in abusive situations. Some of us may have. We may have had alcoholic parents. We may have been put in a situation where we became the parent. It may be where someone in your home was ill and you saw that everyone put all their time into caring for that person. And while that might have been good and necessary, it can develop a lack of boundaries. And that's where the issue becomes a problem. If we don't take care of these issues and look at them early in life, we do carry them into adulthood. and eventually they will come out and leak in one way or the other. So let's get into tools to combat compassion fatigue. The first one's to be aware. Often we go through life and we don't even take time to see what we're feeling, how we're acting. Are there changes in our behavior? Are there changes in our coworkers' behavior? So being aware is number one. It all starts there. I'm sure many of you have seen the Caregivers Bill of Rights. We usually give them to our patients and our families. I would encourage you, if you have not, to go on the web, and you can find them anywhere. Just type in Caregivers Bill of Rights and you'll see. Very good thing to check in for yourself and look at them periodically. But here are some of the things it addresses. To regain balance. What's your life look like? Is it get up, go to work, come home, get up, go to work, come home? Sometimes it is, and sometimes that's necessary. But over a period of time, are you spending time with family and friends? Are you going out for yourself and taking a walk, getting exercise? Are you spending time alone? So most of us on a regular basis need to just check in and look at how balanced or out of balance is our life. Exercise, eat healthy, get enough sleep, spiritual practices. Well, we can all do better in this area, especially with COVID and having to shelter in for a long period of time. But there's still things you can do and should do for yourself every day. So take a look. That's all. Scan the last week, the last month. When was the last time I did any exercise? When was the last time I really focused in on my eating patterns? And am I sleeping? That's a big one, of course. When we're exhausted, then everything is heightened. And if you're a spiritual person, have you taken time for your spiritual practices? Have you made it a priority, or have you been ignoring it? Take time for yourself. Now, that seems simplistic, but it's not. What are your interests outside of work? Do you read? Do you like music? Do you like exercise? Do you like being with your dog? Do you have interest outside of work? And are you giving those time? Be simplistic. I know it's hard. Many of you go home with children, spouses, partners, people that want things from you when you get home, and it's necessary, an important part of your life. But after you get them in bed, are you maybe taking a long hot bath? Are you just sitting by yourself for a while? Take care of you. As Sean said, if we don't take care of ourselves first, we don't have anything to give to everyone else. So it's very, very important. It's not a selfish act. I think healthcare workers, we're the worst at this. We are just kind of made and created often to take care of other people. It's our gift, it's our strength, but it can be a real weakness if you are completely ignoring yourself and self-care. So again, start little, but do something. Today, you're doing this for yourself. You took the time to come to this, so I applaud you for that. Tomorrow, do something else. Make yourself a priority, even if it's for 15 minutes each day. Express yourself. Some of us don't have a problem expressing ourselves. Some of us do. And I mean in a very healthy way. You know, gratitude journals are really good. We've all heard about those over the years. That's great. I'm not really good at discipline of doing this. I do try to take time every night to just think about what I am grateful for, and you'd be surprised how many things we have to be grateful for. But it's also important to express your negative emotions, if we want to label them that way. And I don't think they're really negative always, it's just emotions. How did you feel today? What happened today? I think you'd be very interested if you started a little journal, just in a simple notebook, reflecting on your day and how it made you feel. Not just what you did, but how it made you feel. And look back at it. You might pleasantly be surprised, or you might see some areas where it's, wow, I didn't know I felt that way so many days in a row. I need to do something about that. Build a support system. Now, this doesn't have to be complicated either. It can be one person, but we all need that person we can talk to, we can be ourselves to. Luckily, today we can do that by Facebook, by texting, so many different ways. So find someone. Be sure you have someone. Might be in your family, might not be at all. And just that you can be you, that you can call up and say, I'm having a lousy day. I'm really worried about this, or I'm really thinking about this. But we all need a support system. As far as at work, it is great to have a support group if your company will. We have one. I do encourage that it be run by a non-staff member. Everybody feels different about that, but here we have a volunteer psychologist that facilitates this for us off-site, and is completely confidential, obviously. And for us, we don't allow management to come. We want it to be a place where every worker can feel they can say whatever they want to, and it may be valid, it may not be valid at all, that a leadership would look bad on them for expressing their feelings or having issues, but it puts that to rest for staff, that they don't have to be concerned with that. So we just set ours up that way. But it's very important to have a support system of some kind. And pets, that's a big one for me. I go home and look at those dogs of mine and the whole world goes away. You know, they're unconditionally happy to see you, no matter what kind of day you've had, and they're just happy you're home. It can be, obviously, some people are cat people, whatever your choice of a pet is, they are great comfort, can bring peace. You can pour your emotions out to them and they'll just look at you and love on you. They're also obviously a really good source of exercise. So think about it. Today you can go, you know, we have cat cafes here. I think they're still open. They may not be with COVID, but where you can go in and pet cats, have a cup of coffee. I've heard there's other places where you can go and walk dogs at shelters and things like that. So if you aren't able to have a pet full time, think about going and rent a pet. Okay, let's talk about what not to do, because this is very important too. First of all, we tend to want to blame others, obviously. It's a human reaction. When we have something going on and we're feeling bad about ourselves, it's very hard to look inward. We often will blame others. So if you find yourself doing that, just kind of check in with yourself and say, wow, what's the real issue? Also, I encourage you not to make life-changing decisions. Big life-changing decisions such as changing your job, getting married, getting divorced, moving. Anytime we're tired, exhausted, depressed, anxious, those symptoms of compassion fatigue, not a good time to make life-changing decisions. Grief, and we'll talk about that more later, but I always encourage people, when you're going through something in your life, give yourself 6 months to a year. I encourage a year with grief, because it's a roller coaster ride, and compassion fatigue is the same way. You may feel great one day and refreshed, and the next day it just hits you again. So try not to make big life-changing decisions. Self-medicate. You know, I'm not against going home and having a glass of wine, a drink, whatever your choice is. Obviously, at times we need prescribed drugs to help us through things, but prescribed drugs, someone that's helping oversee that. If you're seeing that all of a sudden, wow, I'm going home and the one glass of wine doesn't help anymore. I'm going through a bottle by myself, or I need 2 bottles to fall asleep. Whatever it is. I mean, it comes in many ways. Food, same way. If I'm going home and I have to have a chocolate cake and I can't have a piece of chocolate cake, I have to eat the whole chocolate cake to feel better. Obviously, there's an issue. So just take a look, reflect. What do you do? How do you deal with your daily work? Healthcare work is hard. It's emotional, it's physical, and we all have to have a way to relax and take care of ourselves. But self-medicating is a real sign that you need some help. Work harder and longer hours. Often we want to ignore everything and just work harder. Take more shifts. And that's not good. That's not going to help. Neglect your own needs. Obviously, we've talked about that, but we tend to often in healthcare, and this too can start in our family of origin, become very outward directed, meaning everything is about everyone else we're caring for. We're not self-directed. We don't self-reflect. We feel selfish if we do anything for ourselves. Maybe somebody has told you that. It's always giving, giving. Somewhere we heard it, whether anyone said it or not, it's what we heard. We're here to meet everyone else's needs. And again, that comes from a very good and genuine place, but it can be very self-destructive if it gets out of balance. So don't neglect your own needs. They're important. Let's talk about grief. It's a very natural reaction to a death or loss. And there's a very interesting thing I like people to do that haven't experienced a death maybe in the last year, but to count your losses because you're going to grieve them. Have you moved? Now, we have a lot of military spouses working for us here, and I'm sure in all of your healthcare areas, they have their own set of grief issues. They have to move a lot. They make friends and they've got to move. They get used to an area and they've got to move. That's grief. You might change jobs. Your friends might move away. The death of a pet. There's many losses. And it's interesting when we look at this and see how many losses we've had in a year and realize, we might not have taken time to grieve any of those appropriately. We just pick up and keep on going. So it's very important to look. Grief is natural, it's normal, it's healthy. It can make you more compassionate, have more empathy. It can strengthen you, but only if it's addressed. Each experience is unique. We're unique. We don't know how someone else is feeling when they're grieving. We only know how we feel. So it might be a death of a very close loved one. It might be a loss of a job. Each grief is unique and people uniquely grieve. It's ongoing and influenced by many issues. Frequency of exposure to death is very important. We need to really be aware of that. Has ongoing loss become just another thing to us, become routine? Especially as leadership, we need to be aware. How many losses is someone experiencing on our staff? How frequent are they happening? It can also be influenced, obviously, by other things in our lives, like finances, our health, lack of sleep, all those things we talked about in compassion fatigue. So very important to look at how ongoing is it, how long is the grief lasting, and how many other issues are influencing them. Often the other things in our lives have to be approached and dealt with before we deal with grief. If you're not sleeping, you need to get some help from your doctor perhaps, or a natural remedy to help you sleep. There's just many influences and we need to look at them because it all affects our grief. Okay, we're going to talk specifically about a healthcare issue, and that's disenfranchised grief. Now, this can happen in our personal life too, but it's very common for healthcare workers specifically. It's related to compassion fatigue because it can be an area where others fail to acknowledge or recognize that we're going through it. And sometimes we're in an ambivalent culture that develops in our workplace because we deal with death so often, and especially with high frequencies of deaths. Are those deaths recognized by staff? Is staff involved in perhaps the anticipatory grief of the families? You know, I think about the COVID issues today and you heroes working in the hospitals and long-term care. In hospice, obviously, we deal with impending death, but in hospitals and long-term care, often you're caring for them because they're going to get better and go home. And now with COVID, you're facing a whole different range of issues. And it's important that your grief is recognized. You also may be stepping into the role that normally the family would take, being by the patient's side and being with them in their last days. And so that needs to be recognized by yourself, by your leadership, with your coworkers, that you're facing different types of things today, and grief is very much one of them. When we don't recognize it outwardly and acknowledge it, it leaves the bereaved isolated by society, and it just stops the normal grieving process when you're not able to, and I don't like to use the word closure, but I'll use it because it's a good one to just kind of understand. The normal process for grief is we have a loss, we have recognition of the loss. If it's a death, we celebrate that person's life in some form, funeral, memorial service, family discussion, but there's some way that we celebrate the person and what they meant to us. And then we have a funeral, a memorial, a gravesite, a closure of that person's life. Not a closure of your grief, because that goes on, but there is a real ritual that is important. So when we don't have that, when we're not able as a healthcare worker perhaps to attend a funeral or a memorial service, or even to speak to the family and give empathy and compassionate care to them post-death, then it just kind of shuts us off out of the process. So it's important to take time at work with your coworkers, with someone, your support system perhaps, and just say, you know, this person really made me laugh. This person was a fun person. He or she told me stories of their life. Did you know they were this or that? A way to recognize what the person meant to you, and that now you're grieving them. So it can be very isolating for healthcare workers to not be able to go through that process as they would on a personal loss. Let's talk about indicators of disenfranchised grief and the degree of impact on a person. Often shame is a emotion that is felt and displayed because perhaps you were raised that you're not supposed to show your emotions. Perhaps in your work setting, you are not allowed to show emotion, or it's looked down on. Or that just may be your perception, and that's not true at all. But you feel it, and you feel shame for feeling such a loss, perhaps even. Someone may say to you, well, why are you so upset? They weren't your mother, father, loved one, whatever. Or you should have expected it. This is healthcare. You better get used to it. There's things that can be said that aren't meant to be harmful, but they are harmful and they can cause shame. So if you're feeling shame, again, reach out to somebody that you trust and express that and deal with it, because you'll carry it forward in other areas of your life. You may have a sense that one is not allowed to grieve or does not need to grieve. Again, they go hand in hand. Often, you know, I have heard supervisors tell CNAs, nurses, you know, buck up, this is it. Maybe this work isn't for you. And again, they don't mean to be harsh, but yes, it is part of healthcare, but emotion is part of being human. And grieving someone that you gave comfort and care to is very real and very natural. And if you don't get to express that, it can cause the things below. Here are things that affect it. Circumstances of death. It could have been a violent death. Our friends that work in hospitals, and specifically ERs, trauma centers, will have to deal with sometimes very violent deaths, and that brings a whole array of its own issues of grief. Did the person come on and you thought you were going to have time to care for them and bring them comfort? Did they die suddenly and you're like, oh, is there something more I should have done? Did I do what needed to be done for this person in such a short time? And of course, you may have been caring for this person for months and years in a long-term care setting, and they die. And that needs to be recognized, because that person you gave yourself to every day, even with very healthy boundaries, you're caring for someone. Influence of others. Now, this is a big one again. Are people, allowing you to grieve? Are they recognizing your grief? Or is it just business as usual? Acceptance and response to symptoms. Did anybody even validate that I've lost this person? Sure, they may not be my relative, but I was caring for them. I cared for their family. I heard their life stories. Is anyone validating that I have had a loss or not? It's very hard for someone that doesn't work in healthcare to recognize and validate what you're feeling, often because they have nothing to relate to. But let's please, with our coworkers, take time to say, oh, I know you cared for him. You gave great care. I know I heard you laughing with him every day, and this must be hard. Just accept and validate that there is a response and it's okay. Understanding the impact on yourselves. Are you taking any time to deal with your feelings? We talked about this earlier. Are you doing any of the things we talked about? Are you journaling? Are you just expressing yourself to someone? Are you even accepting that what you're feeling is real, valid, a natural, normal response? It's important to take that time. Yes, there's other patients to take care of. Often you can't do it right away at the time of loss, but are you going back and allowing yourself to feel your feelings, to be aware you're having those feelings, first of all, and accept that it's okay to have them? Or are you just going on with your next day business as usual? Let's talk a little bit about ongoing signs of those impact. Are they recurrent and intrusive recollections of the event? This is much like PTSD. Are you continually seeing that person's face? Are you remembering how they died? Is it interrupting your normal daytime? This will depend on the severity of the circumstance and whether it's multiple deaths. Something we need to be very aware of is you may not be grieving this death at all. It may be the death of someone prior. Now, it's very important and it's very necessary, especially in the healthcare field. It's a busy field, many patients, that you're able to, in a healthy way, put your emotions down a little bit. I always say put them up on the shelf. I'm visual, so dealing with grief myself, I've had to put my grief in a little box and put it on the shelf sometimes and go to work or take care of your children or whatever it is you need to do. But the important thing is that you take it down. and that you address it. And if necessary, let someone help you address those, because they will come back. If we don't grieve our losses, they will come back. So it's important to just sit down and think a minute. Am I having an overreaction to this person's death? Maybe, maybe not. But if you think so, am I really grieving this person's death? Or is it reminding me of a prior death that I didn't deal with? A prior loss of some kind. It doesn't even have to be death, but often it is. Did I ever really grieve losing that job that was so important to me? Did I really ever grieve moving away and leaving my family? It's just important to sit down and look and say, why am I having these recollections of this particular death? And is it out of balance? Am I generally non-responsive or detached? This can manifest by, I'm fine. Smiling when you don't feel like smiling. Again, all these things can be very important to be able to do to continue on with our life. But it's important to look and see, why are we doing it? And again, are we doing it so that we don't have to deal with anything? Am I becoming overly detached to the people I'm caring for and people I'm working with? Professional burnout. I've seen that a lot. And normally, again, it can be because we're not willing to deal with our symptoms that are coming about when they come about. It can show up in a manner of, I don't really care anymore. I'm just going through the motion. Just working for the paycheck. That might be important, or that might be true at certain times in our lives. But for healthcare workers especially, people that are giving compassion, empathy, personal care, we're not working for the paycheck. We're not going to work every day and not caring about what we're doing. So if you're experiencing that, then again, speak to someone, work it out, work through it. It may be that we go through those periods from time to time, but again, it's because we're not doing self-care normally. So if you're feeling really burned out professionally, and it's like, I don't know why I do this work, I don't know why I'm in this line of work, don't make a big life change. Seek help and find out. I personally took a break from hospice for a while because I did feel like I needed a break from dealing with death and dying every day. And it was a good thing, but I ultimately came back because I feel it's my real calling and passion. So it's real, it's valid, and it may be time to change professions. But I just encourage you to seek help first and see how it's manifesting and why you're feeling that way. Depression and anxiety. Well, again, we can have these from time to time, but are you waking up in the morning and your heart is palpitating and you're anxious and you don't want to go to work? Are you not wanting to get out of bed? Not because you're tired, but because you just don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to face the world, your coworkers, your job, your family. And is it prolonged? I always say it's good to take a self-care day and just stay in bed all day if you're feeling depressed. But if you have to stay more than one day, you need to look at it. And why am I feeling that way? And anxiety, of course, is a very true and valid experience, and one that can be helped in many ways, whether it's medically or through meditation and other ways of caring for yourself. But it's just a matter of how much is this showing up. Emotional liability. This again can happen. It's another way of becoming detached, but it's just, you don't trust yourself anymore. You don't trust yourself forming relationships. I don't want to care for anybody ever again. I'm never going through this again. I never want to have this kind of loss again. So I'm not going to build relationships. I'm sure you can see how that's not healthy. We were created for relationships. They're important. And so if you're feeling like, I just don't ever want to get close to anybody again, that's another sign. Spiritual distress. You know, we all question from time to time the meaning of life and death. And that can be a good thing to explore. But if you have a strong spiritual value or practice that you've always had in your life that has kind of been your center, and now you're staying away from that, or you're not practicing your spiritual practices and disciplines anymore, then it could be a sign of an impact of disenfranchised grief. So anything out of the normal. Am I changing my routine in a way that I can't explain or have no real way to understand? It's just, I don't want to do that anymore. Well, let's look beyond that at why don't you want to do that anymore? Again, reach out to others. Okay, contributing factors to the severity. Speed of reoccurring events. For those of you in supervision, very important to look at your staff. How many deaths have they had to deal with this week? Is it their role to be hands-on? You know, CNAs, nurses, you're my heroes, and you always will be, because you deal with people at a time that is most of the time very tragic for them. They need you very desperately. They need a calm and constant force in their life. You're caring for their personal hygiene. You're easing their pain and suffering. When you go through that day after day, and again, don't take time for yourself or to look at your emotions, that's when we get into trouble. So I think it's leadership's responsibility to, especially in a field where there's multiple deaths happening on a regular basis, to be aware and just check in with people. How much are they really dealing with, and how often? Is it violent or an unexpected loss? We're never ready to lose someone. Doesn't matter whether it's unexpected or someone's been ill for a long time. We're rarely ready for that moment, even when we think we are. But these two factors can heighten the issue. Was it a very violent death? And was it unexpected? Again, did someone come on service and I thought I was going to be able to help them relieve their pain, have what we call, obviously in healthcare, a good death, or did it come very suddenly and catch me off guard? Again, we start thinking, did I do enough? Should I have done more? Could we have given them this medication or that medication? So that really affects us, unexpected or a violent death. Intentionality. This is a big one for us in hospice. Did the patient's death resemble his or her wishes as we understood it? Was it pain-free? Were no aggressive measures used? Were aggressive measures used? Was it peaceful versus suffering? Of course, it's all our perception, but it's very important to us. Often we have in our own mind how this person should die, or if they even should. So that can become a real issue if you feel like the circumstances were not what the patient wanted for themselves. And often they will express that if you have time to work with them, especially in long-term setting, care setting. Often patients will begin to talk about that. And so it's important to look at our perception of suffering. What is your perception of suffering? Have you ever asked yourself, what is suffering to you? That's, you know, is someone in pain? Or does someone want to be in pain and be more cognitive? We all have different ideas of suffering. So it's important to know your perception of suffering, because as you're dealing with people that are ill, it just becomes very important to you to know that you've done all you can to eliminate what you think is their suffering. Degree of exposure, or your role or proximity to the patient. Again, whether you work in the office and you process paperwork, you see the patient's diagnosis, you see the family members, names, ages, whatever, you still may be feeling some grief when this person dies, when you hear of them dying, because you have a very important and valid role in their caretaking. Social workers, chaplains. You may only see this person once a month, twice a month. You may feel like you're not that attached, or may feel like you're not doing all you can do, but you're still going to grieve. So you don't have to have hands-on care every day. You don't have to be the CNA and nurse to feel an impact of this. But obviously, the more hands-on care you're giving, the more you're exposed and around the patient, you're going to feel deeper grief, perhaps. Again, concurrent losses and stresses. We talked about these, both personal and work-related. You can be dealing with some personal grief issues that are not resolved, and it obviously is going to affect your work. You may have financial issues. You may have family stresses. It's just good to be aware. How many outside stresses do I have besides my daily work? Because it will all come into play in one area or the other. And for supervisors, again, if you know your staff is going through something in their personal life, be aware of how it might be affecting their work. And I don't mean that in a negative, judgy way. I mean in, what does this person need? How can I come alongside of them? How can I help them through this and give them some grace and extra care during their time of personal issues? Proportion of community shared grief. Again, to what degree are family and staff able to communicate the loss? Expression of sympathy, empathy, and grief. It can be a very important element, obviously, for staff, but also for the family. So are we able to share it? Is there a place in my daily work, again, to recognize the loss? Are you taking time in your team meetings or whatever your meetings, however they look at your place of work, to recognize that we've experienced a loss here? This is not a number. This was a person, and we've had a loss. The family's had a loss. Sending cards to the family, anything you can do that involves you as a community experiencing the loss will be helpful. So how do I assist a coworker through a death or a loss? Well, number one, are you even comfortable doing that? Have you ever asked yourself, how do I feel about a coworker that breaks down? Do I think they should hold their emotion in? How do I feel about death? Things we can ask ourselves first. But certainly when you see a coworker that is having an issue, or they come to you with an issue, listen. You don't have to fill the air with words. Listen, be present. If you do nothing else, just do that. Let someone express how they're feeling, or let them cry. Crying is not bad. Crying is very healthy. Validate what they're feeling. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to even comment on it to validate it. You're just with them and say, I know this was a loss. You don't have to get into the emotional labeling. I know you've had a loss. Just be there. Ask what they need, not what you think they need. Ask what they need. Don't judge them, and don't offer platitudes. We're good at that. He's in a better place. God needed him more than we did. They just need you to be there and be present. So to wrap this up, the number one thing is be aware of yourself. Look around at your coworkers. Just be with each other and start small with little things you can do for each other. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sally. A wonderful presentation, and a couple of things you said that stuck with me are it's okay to experience grief and have those human emotions for patients you've perhaps been caring for. And not only is it okay, but it's healthy, and you can have those human emotions and still have those professional boundaries. They can coincide, both can exist. But also what you said, which is fascinating and we don't tend to think about, is that the experience of grief is not always related to the loss of a loved one or a person. It can be related to losing one's home, one's community, perhaps a job. And it really is those same types of feelings. And for me, I think it better defines some experiences I've had in the past myself. So thank you for that. We do have about 10 minutes. I'd like to open up for questions. You can raise your hand via Zoom. You can type a question. If you'd like, please feel free to send a question our way. I did have a question here already for you, Sally. It's coming from someone who was a caregiver for a patient for 10 years. She was caring for a gentleman who passed away. She was blindsided by the grief she was not expecting to experience. And it's been 2 years. She still has waves of grief. She's wondering if she's ever going to feel normal again.
Excellent question. Common question. I'm glad she's asking it of herself because, first of all, you have a new normal. Your life will never be the same. You've had a loss. And you may have thought that because you cared for him a long time, and perhaps, I don't know if he was ill during that time, you thought you were preparing yourself for the loss, but we can't be prepared. So first of all, it's not unusual to have grief for 2 years. Now, hopefully it is changing. We don't get over a loss, a death of someone, especially someone we cared for so long, but our grief does change. So I would say if you're having symptoms that we talked about, lack of sleep, unhealthy symptoms, then please seek care. Support groups are great. If you haven't been to one, I would encourage you to reach out to those. But no, grief lasts for as long as you're alive because it's just a sign of loving someone, caring for someone. But it changes, as I said. So it shouldn't be as perhaps deep or as long, the symptoms lasting as long and being as strong. So reach out to somebody. I would say, no, you're not abnormal. But if you feel like it's an issue, talk to somebody.
Absolutely, thank you. We have a question from our friend Jeanette at Kokuamau. If I'm reading this right, I think that's who's asking this question. Thank you, Sally. Can you talk about how COVID impacts us? I find myself grieving on what our community is losing, has lost, etc.
Yes, I am right there with you. Sometimes I have to take a break from the news because it's not hands-on experience I'm having of the deaths around the nation or the world, but obviously it impacts us. And also the loss of jobs, people's loss of their homes. I can't even imagine how many people are going to become homeless out of this, and it just is frightening sometimes because I don't know what to do about it. But yes, COVID brings, and it brought it out of nowhere for all of us. All of a sudden our lives changed. Just in the way of maybe working from home. I mean, that brings a whole different group of symptoms in it. Loss of relationship at work, socialization. So yes, but it's the same grief process. We're grieving life as we knew it. And we may not have a hands-on experience of someone dying of COVID, but the loss of community, resources. And, you know, the economic loss for here in Hawaii especially is great, and with no real end in sight. When we don't have tangent solutions, it's very hard for us. So yes, it's, again, recognizing your emotions and doing what you can in some way to help out, whether it's volunteering somewhere or just being available to talk to someone about what they're going through too with their change in situation.
So this is fascinating. I'm having maybe some personal moments here, but in regards to COVID, I was recently looking back at some videos of a vacation I took last year, looking at some video clips, and there we are in big groups of people, you know, no social distancing or masks, which of course I support those things, but I almost felt a sadness come over me looking back at those pictures and videos of a trip I took a year ago. I guess that would be grief that I'm feeling. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Absolutely. Just realizing, when will I get to travel again? When will I get to have a picnic again with more than 10 people that I don't live with? You know, when are we going to be allowed to? Just at work, you know, we haven't, obviously we've kept it down to 10 people in the office. That's a whole nother thing. When are we going to be able to have big luncheons and meetings again? Yeah. Exactly. I enjoyed this today, but I would have rather you all been here so we could interact. So
this is a perfect example. Yeah, technology is wonderful, but this is something that could be done in person. It's, you know, it's one of those things where I think we have a lot of good participation today because it's easy to pop in, but we're not together. We're not in person. I know at Islands Hospice, we've had to postpone our all-staff meetings that we have, and that's sad. We're looking towards our Christmas, our winter gala. You know, will that be happening? Will it not? It's one of the most exciting events of the year for the staff. And so someone else asked a question about, can you talk about how we can talk to coworkers who we think are experiencing grief, stress, or anxiety, but aren't seeking help?
Yes, that's a good question. It's important, first of all, to have relationship, and that's, you know, different degrees, but if they just know that you care, which can be displayed by just saying, how you doing? You know, there's a lot going on today. I'm having issues with, and expressing, you know, yourself a little bit first opens it up. They'll feel safe. Maybe just say, hey, I'm going to go for a walk. You want to walk around the block with me? Asking them, just checking in with them in general. Again, we can't make somebody share these things, but normally it comes out of relationship best. So perhaps just starting in small ways that way, eating lunch with them or asking them if they want to go out for a cup of coffee, this or that. I mean, there's a million different ways, but basically it's just that human touch-in, check-in. How you doing? Or, man, this has been hard for me lately. How about you? So ask open-ended questions that they can't just say yes or no, but and just do it gently, and it might take 3 or 4 times, but once they see you truly are caring and listening to whatever they say, they may open up better.
You know, it's true, it goes a long way, just asking somebody, how are you feeling today? How was your weekend? I know when people ask me that and take the time, even if maybe it wasn't very climactic, it makes me feel better. Another question is from somebody saying they feel like they always have to be strong on the outside, and they're perhaps at risk of internalizing a lot of feelings because they feel obligated to be the strong one in the family or the strong one in the clinic. Have you experienced this before? Have you seen this before?
All the time. I've experienced it in my personal life. I was the youngest of 4 children, and normally it's the oldest child that often has to deal with this or is raised with that because they're always caring for siblings. But in my family, it fell on me. And so I found myself as caretaker, caregiver for even some of my siblings. at different times in their life. So you develop this feeling of, I can't break down or the whole world's going to fall apart. Somebody has to hold this together. And it can happen at work too, sure. But that's a false thing to think about yourself, because it's not true. If you break down, the world's not going to fall apart. The world's not going to end. So in a way, it can be false humility. It can be false identity that you're the only one that can. But it's a natural feeling. And yeah, it again often comes from our family of origin, but it can also come because you're a natural leader, and that's your gift and your strength. And so you jump in there. And when it seems like everybody else isn't going to do something, you take a hold of it and get it done. So it can be a strength and a weakness. So if you're feeling that way, I would say in little ways, let go of things. Start saying no when you really mean no. Don't do something you really don't want to do. So first of all, you have to be aware of yourself. Am I imposing this on myself? Do I always say yes? Am I the one that's always doing? Am I the one that's always making sure everything happens? Well, start sharing that responsibility. So you have to give it up first to be able to do that. So, but that often can happen, and we develop that kind of personality, yeah. So do it in little ways. Say no when you really mean no. Nothing's worse than saying, yes, I'll do it, and then the time comes and, oh, I don't want to do this. So if you're finding that about yourself, start saying no.
Absolutely. Sally, are you the eldest daughter? I've heard that, and maybe that's an old saying. You're the youngest. Okay, someone told me once that, I don't know if there's any studies that prove this, but the eldest daughter takes on the responsibility, but apparently not. That's not always the case.
No, but it usually is, because it's usually given to that person, the eldest sibling, period, female or male, depending on the family, but yeah.
Yeah, that was my mom, the eldest daughter. She's also a nurse, so she certainly had that responsibility for both her parents. We have just a couple more minutes, but are the five stages of grief real? Do they happen at the same or different times? Gosh, you could probably do a whole presentation on the stages of grief.
Oh yeah, one of my favorite subjects. Are they real? Well, let's define real. Do you experience them? Yes. Do they come in a linear fashion? Never. You're up and down within any 15 minutes, 5 minutes. So when we think we're going to move from one to the other, and we're watching ourselves or watching someone else to see if they are, but certainly if we're gauging our own grief by them, we're doing ourselves a disservice, because it doesn't happen that way. You may be very accepting one day of the death, or think you are, and the next day you can't get out of bed because you're just so depressed. So within any amount of time, and literally within a half hour, you can feel them all up and down. Grief is a roller coaster. That's why it's very important you're good to yourself. You reach out and get help, and that is not a weakness, it's a necessity. We need to help each other through our grief. It's important. Relationships important. Support groups are so important for that reason. The support may be within your family. It may be very necessary. It's not. And it's someone you're not emotionally tied to. But no, the 5 stages of grief, most people for many, many years have felt like useful to recognize those things do happen. There aren't 5 stages of grief.
Well, I can feel another presentation coming on in the future, so stand by. But Sally, thank you so much for your presentation today. Everybody, Sally Hanley, certified grief counselor, board certified chaplain, ordained minister. Thank you so much. We're going to wrap things up here. I wanted to just mention a few things. This webinar was recorded. It will be posted on our website, islandshospice.com. I always say it's islands with an S. Islandshospice.com. We'll put it on our Facebook. Feel free to reach out. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and we look forward to having you tune into an upcoming presentation as we continue to implement these new webinars with the changing times. So thank you, Sally. Thank you all for attending, and God bless.
Thank you.
Mahalo.